I grew up knowing I would always be second best in my parents' eyes. My younger brother Jake was their golden child, their perfect son who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I worked my whole life to earn a fraction of their approval. The day I finally bought my dream car with my own money was supposed to be my moment of pride. Instead, it became the night that exposed just how deep my family dysfunction really went. My entitled parents actually wanted me to go to prison for something Jake did. Before I start this crazy story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like if you believe family should put fairness above everything else. And subscribe if you want to hear how both my brother and father ended up behind bars. Growing up in our middle-class home in suburban Massachusetts, the difference in how my parents treated Jake and me was obvious to everyone except them. My father Frank, a stern accountant, and my mother Diana, a high school teacher, always had different standards for us. When we were kids, if we both got in trouble, Jake would get a talking to while I would lose privileges for weeks. If we both earned good grades, Jake got lavish gifts while I got a pat on the back. As we got older, the pattern only intensified. When I turned 16, my parents made it clear I needed to get a part-time job if I wanted spending money or a car. I worked 20 hours a week at the local grocery store, all through high school, maintaining my GPA while saving every penny. Jake, on the other hand, was given an allowance that exceeded my weekly paycheck, with no expectations attached. College was another painful reminder of our different places in the family. I had to take out student loans and work multiple jobs to afford tuition at the state university. Jake not only had his tuition paid in full for a private college, but also received a brand new sports car for his 18th birthday. The irony: he dropped out after 3 semesters with my parents, making excuses about how college just was not for everyone. Despite everything, I worked hard and graduated with an engineering degree. I landed a great job at a technology firm in Boston, working my way up to a respectable salary over 4 years. I lived modestly in a small apartment, gradually paying down my student debt, and finally saving enough to buy my first car at 28. It was not anything flashy, just a reliable 3-year-old sedan in excellent condition, but I had earned every cent that paid for it. That car represented my independence and success, despite the lack of support from my family. Even with all the unfair treatment, I tried to maintain a relationship with my parents and brother. I would visit once a month for Sunday dinner call on holidays, and generally try to keep the peace. I always held on to the hope that one day they would see me differently, recognize my accomplishments, maybe even apologize for the years of favoritism. Looking back now, I realize how naive that hope was. Meanwhile, Jake continued his pattern of irresponsibility well into adulthood. By 25, he had been through multiple jobs, never lasting more than a few months at any of them. He still lived in our parents' basement, had accumulated significant credit card debt, which our parents helped pay off multiple times, and had developed a concerning drinking habit. None of this seemed to diminish his golden child status in our family. 2 weeks before the incident that changed everything, I visited my parents for the usual Sunday dinner. I drove my new car, excited to share this milestone with them, even though I knew better than to expect much enthusiasm. When I pulled into the driveway, my father barely glanced at it, asking only if it was reliable. My mother gave it a cursory compliment before quickly changing the subject to tell me about the new gaming system they had just bought for Jake. During dinner, Jake kept asking questions about my car, which initially seemed like genuine interest. He asked about the horsepower, the features, even how much I had paid for it. I now realize he was not admiring my achievement, but sizing up what he would soon try to take. As usual, I left that dinner feeling deflated, wondering why I kept subjecting myself to the same disappointment. Little did I know that in 2 weeks, that familiar feeling of disappointment would be replaced by something much darker and more painful. It was 2:30 in the morning when my phone jolted me awake. Groggy and confused, I answered to hear an unfamiliar voice identifying themselves as a nurse from Boston Medical Center. My brother Jake had been admitted following a car accident and had listed me as his emergency contact. My first thought was concern for him despite our complicated relationship. My second thought was confusion about why he had not called our parents instead. I threw on clothes and drove to the hospital, still half asleep, and trying to piece together what might have happened. When I arrived at the emergency department and gave Jake's name, the nurse pointed me toward a curtained area but mentioned that police officers were also waiting to speak with me. That was my first indication something was seriously wrong. When I pulled back the curtain, the sight of Jake hit me like a punch to the gut. He had a gash across his forehead that had been stitched up. His arm was in a temporary cast, and his face was bruised and swollen. But what truly shocked me was the smell of alcohol that seemed to radiate from him even over the antiseptic hospital odors. As soon as he saw me, he started crying, something I had not seen him do since we were children. Through his tears and slurred speech, I began to understand the horrifying reality. The car he had crashed was not his, it was mine. Somehow he had taken my car without permission, driven it while heavily intoxicated, and caused an accident. Before I could even process this information, 2 police officers approached. They explained that Jake had crashed into another vehicle carrying a family of 4, including 2 children. While no one had life-threatening injuries, all 4 family members had been hurt, with the father sustaining a broken leg and 1 child suffering a concussion. When the officers asked if I had given Jake permission to drive my car, I firmly said no. I explained that I lived alone and had been asleep when the accident occurred, with my car supposedly parked outside my apartment building. Just as I was trying to figure out how Jake had gotten my keys, my parents burst into the emergency room. My mother immediately rushed to Jake, cradling his head and asking if he was okay while completely ignoring my presence. My father pulled me aside, his face red with anger, and hissed, "Why could you not just let your brother borrow your car when he asked?" I stared at him in disbelief. Jake had never asked to borrow my car. He must have stolen my spare key during that Sunday dinner 2 weeks ago, knowing my schedule and planning this all along. When I tried to explain this to my father, he dismissed my words with a wave of his hand. The situation deteriorated further when the police officer returned and informed us that Jake had told them I had given him permission to drive after we had been drinking together. This was a complete fabrication. I had been home alone all night, had not consumed any alcohol, and certainly had not given Jake permission to take my car. When I stated this clearly to the officers, my mother gasped as if I had physically struck her. "You are going to let your brother take the fall for this," she whispered incredulously. The officers stepped away to give us privacy, but the family drama was just beginning. My parents huddled around Jake, whispering intently. When they approached me again, my father's expression had changed from anger to something more calculating. "Anderson." My father began in the same tone he used when brokering deals at work. "Jake made a mistake. Yes, but we need to handle this as a family. He has his whole future ahead of him. A DUI with injuries could ruin his life. You are established. You have a good job. You could weather this much better than he could." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Are you actually suggesting that I lie to the police and say I was driving my own car when it crashed?" My mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Please, Anderson." Jake just was not thinking clearly. He could go to prison. Think about what that would do to him. She grabbed my hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have always been the strong one. You can handle this. Jake cannot." I pulled my hands away, feeling sick to my stomach. This was beyond their usual favoritism. They were asking me to commit a crime, to perjure myself, to take responsibility for a serious offense that could indeed result in jail time, loss of my license, and potentially even my job. All to protect Jake from the consequences of his own reckless actions. Actions that had injured innocent people. When I firmly refused, my father changed tactics. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "If you do not do this for your brother, do not consider yourself part of this family anymore. I mean it, Anderson. This is where I draw the line." Those words cut through me like a knife, despite the years of unequal treatment that should have prepared me for such an ultimatum. I looked from my father to my mother, who was nodding in agreement, tears streaming down her face, and to Jake, who was watching the exchange with bloodshot eyes, saying nothing in his own defense, nor in mine. That was the moment I realized how truly dysfunctional my family was, and how little I actually meant to them. I was not a son or a brother to them. I was a potential scapegoat, a convenient solution to Jake's problems. Nothing more. I walked out of the hospital that night with a hollowness in my chest that felt like it might never be filled again. But beneath that emptiness, something else was beginning to burn. A resolve that would eventually transform my life and bring this whole twisted situation to a conclusion that none of us could have anticipated. The next morning I was awakened by insistent knocking at my apartment door. When I opened it, I found my parents standing there with a man in a suit who I recognized as Howard Griffith, our family attorney since I was a child. My father pushed past me into my living room. Without waiting for an invitation, my mother and the lawyer following behind. "I need coffee for this," I muttered, heading to the kitchen. I could feel a tension headache building behind my eyes, a combination of too little sleep and too much family drama. When I returned with my mug, they were all seated, looking like a tribunal ready to pass judgment. "We have been discussing the situation," my father announced without preamble, "and we have a plan that will work for everyone." Howard, the lawyer, opened his briefcase, pulling out several documents. "We believe the best approach is for you to state that you were driving, but that Jake borrowed your identity at the scene because he panicked." I nearly choked on my coffee. So not only am I supposed to say I was driving drunk and caused an accident, but I also need to admit to fleeing the scene. Are you insane? My mother leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Anderson, this is serious. The family that Jake hit is already talking about a civil lawsuit. They have medical bills, trauma, their car is totaled. If Jake gets convicted of a DUI with injuries on top of that, he could face years in prison." The word years hung in the air like a threat. My father seized on it immediately. "Jake is not built for prison, Anderson. You know that. He is sensitive. He would be destroyed in there." He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a strange mix of demand and something almost like respect. "But you have always been tougher. You could handle it if it came to that, which it probably would not." I could not believe what I was hearing. My own father was essentially saying I was expendable, that my freedom was worth sacrificing for Jake's comfort. The family attorney, looking uncomfortable but professional, slid a paper across my coffee table. "If you do decide to take responsibility, we would of course ensure that all your expenses are covered. Lost wages, legal fees, everything. Frank has also authorized me to offer you a substantial sum for your cooperation." My father nodded, adding, $200,000, Anderson. Think about it. Even if you did have to serve some time, you would come out with enough to start fresh. Buy a house, maybe start your own business. They were trying to buy me. Put a price tag on my freedom, my reputation, my entire future. I felt a surge of disgust so strong it nearly made me physically ill. My own parents were sitting in my living room, calmly plotting to sacrifice me to save their precious golden child. "What about the family Jake injured?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. "What about their pain, their trauma? Am I supposed to look them in the eye in court and lie about being responsible for hurting them?" My mother waved this away as if it were an insignificant detail. "They will get their insurance money either way. It makes no difference to them who takes the blame. But it makes a difference to me," I said, standing up. "It makes a difference to the truth. I will not do it. Jake stole my car. Jake drove drunk. Jake caused that accident. Jake can face the consequences of his own actions for once in his life." My father's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He stood as well, his height still intimidating, even though I was now a grown man. "If you do this, if you let your brother go to prison, you are no longer my son. Do you understand me? I will cut you out of my will. I will never speak your name again. You will be dead to me." For a moment I felt like that small boy again, desperate for his approval and afraid of his anger. But I was not that boy anymore. I was a man who had built a life on my own terms without their help or support. "Get out," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "All of you. Get out of my home right now." My mother began to cry loud, theatrical sobs that once might have manipulated me into compliance. Howard, the lawyer, quickly gathered his papers, muttering something about giving the family time to discuss privately. My father stood his ground, staring me down. "You will regret this, Anderson. This is the biggest mistake of your life." I held the door open, my resolve hardening with every passing second. "The only mistake I ever made was continuing to hope you would someday be the father I deserved." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. But alongside the pain was something else, something unexpected. Relief. a sense of finally being freed from the toxic dynamic that had defined my family relationships for decades. And with that, relief came clarity about what I needed to do next. That afternoon, I contacted the police department, handling Jake's case, and arranged to give a formal statement. I explained exactly what had happened, how Jake had never had permission to drive my car, how I suspected he had stolen my spare key during a family dinner, and how I had been home alone asleep when the accident occurred. The detective taking my statement seemed unsurprised, mentioning that their initial investigation already suggested Jake had been lying about having permission. When I mentioned my parents' pressure to take the blame, the detective gave me a knowing look. "You would not believe how often we see this," he said. "Families trying to protect the problem child at the expense of the responsible one. Usually it works, because the responsible one gives in. Good for you for standing your ground." His words gave me an unexpected boost of confidence. I had spent so many years believing there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow less worthy of love and protection than Jake. Hearing this objective confirmation that what my parents were doing was not normal felt validating in a way I desperately needed. After giving my statement, I took additional steps to protect myself. I contacted my neighbor Martin, who had a security camera pointing at our building's parking area. He was able to provide footage clearly showing Jake approaching my car at 1:15 a.m., using a key to enter it, and driving away. This visual evidence supported my statement that the car had been taken without my knowledge or permission. I also reached out to my friend Sarah, whose apartment I had visited earlier that evening before returning home around 11 p.m. She was willing to confirm my whereabouts, and the fact that I had not been drinking, providing me with a partial alibi for the night. As I was building my defense, I received a disturbing call from another detective on the case. They had discovered that Jake had 2 prior DUI incidents that had never proceeded to conviction because my father had, in his words, taken care of them. The detective wanted to know if I had any knowledge of this. I was genuinely shocked. I knew Jake had a drinking problem, but I had no idea he had previous encounters with law enforcement over it. The detective explained that in one case the charges were mysteriously dropped, and in another, Jake had completed a private rehabilitation program instead of facing legal consequences. The detective strongly implied that my father had used his connections or money to make these problems disappear. This revelation made me realize the situation was even worse than I had thought. My parents had been enabling Jake's dangerous behavior for years, potentially putting countless lives at risk by ensuring he never faced real consequences. Their actions had not been protecting Jake, they had been ensuring he would eventually cause a tragedy just like this one. With this new information, I decided to take an additional step. I reached out to the family injured in the accident through my own attorney. I wanted them to know that while I was not responsible for their injuries, I was deeply sorry for what my brother had done, and I was committed to seeing justice served. I also wanted to ensure they knew the truth, in case my parents tried to approach them with some sort of settlement offer contingent on dropping charges. What I did not expect was to discover that my father had already tried to do exactly that. He had contacted the injured family, offering them a substantial sum if they would tell police they were uncertain about who had been driving, or that they believed the accident was partly their fault. Fortunately, they had refused, and reported this attempted bribery to the police. This was the final straw. My father had now moved beyond simply enabling Jake to actively obstructing justice and attempting to tamper with witnesses. When the police called to inform me they were investigating these new allegations against my father, I provided them with everything I knew, including details of the meeting in my apartment where he had offered me money to take the blame. 3 days later, I watched in a strange mix of horror and vindication as my father was led away from his office in handcuffs, charged with witness tampering, attempted bribery of a public official, and obstruction of justice. Jake, still recovering from his injuries, but now, also in custody, faced charges of grand theft auto driving under the influence, causing injury, providing false information to police, and several other related offenses. My mother, who had called me screaming and cursing when my father was arrested, now found herself alone, her husband and favorite son both facing serious criminal charges. I felt no joy in her pain, only a profound sadness for the family we could have been, if love had been distributed equally and responsibility had been valued over enabling. The court proceedings stretched over 3 months, during which time I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I bought another used car, threw myself into my work, and began seeing a therapist to process the lifetime of family dysfunction that had culminated in this painful situation. My mother refused to speak to me, blaming me entirely for the legal troubles facing my father and brother. She would sit in the courtroom during hearings, glaring at me as if I were the criminal rather than a victim in this situation. Despite this, I continued to attend every hearing, determined to see the process through. The most difficult day came when Jake took the stand in his own defense. I had expected him to express remorse, to finally take responsibility for his actions. Instead, he doubled down on his lies, claiming that I had not only given him permission to use the car, but had actually encouraged him to drive after we had both been drinking together. "You have to understand," he told the court with practiced sincerity. "Anderson has always been competitive with me. He is jealous of my relationship with our parents. He invited me over, we had some drinks, and when I said I should call a cab, he insisted I take his car. Now he is using this accident to make me look bad and hurt our parents." I sat there stunned as my brother, whom I had spent a lifetime trying to love despite the unequal treatment, betrayed me so completely. The prosecutor, fortunately, was well prepared. She methodically dismantled Jake's story with the security footage phone records, showing I had not called or texted him that night, and testimony from both Sarah and my neighbor confirming my whereabouts. But the true turning point came when the prosecutor revealed her surprise witness. A young woman named Tiffany approached the stand, someone I had never seen before. She testified that 2 years earlier, she had been hit by Jake while he was driving under the influence, resulting in injuries that required surgery. She described how charges had mysteriously been dropped after a private meeting between my father and the district attorney, and how she had received a settlement that came with a strict confidentiality agreement. This testimony was followed by another surprise witness, an elderly man named Harold, who had been Jake and my high school chemistry teacher. He recounted an incident where Jake had shown up drunk to class, and when confronted, my father had made a large donation to the school science lab, in exchange for the matter being handled quietly, without disciplinary action. As these witnesses painted a clear picture of the pattern of enabling and cover-ups, I watched my mother's face change. The anger in her expression gradually gave way to something else, a dawning horror, as she seemed to finally recognize the role she and my father had played in creating this situation. The father of the family, injured in the most recent accident, was the last to testify. Daniel Rodriguez, still using crutches for his broken leg, described not only the trauma of the accident itself, but the aftermath, including my father's attempt to essentially bribe him into changing his story. He spoke eloquently about how this incident had affected his children, particularly his 10-year-old daughter, who was now afraid to ride in cars. When he finished speaking, he turned not to the judge or the prosecutor, but directly to my mother. "Your son could have killed my children," he said, his voice breaking. "And your husband tried to make it all go away with money instead of justice. What kind of example does that set? What kind of man does that raise?" My mother, for perhaps the first time in her life, had no response. She simply sat there, tears streaming down her face, the carefully constructed narrative of her perfect younger son and manipulative older son crumbling around her. The verdicts, when they came, surprised no one. Jake was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. My father received 18 months for his role in attempting to obstruct justice with no possibility of early release. Both were ordered to pay significant restitution to the Rodriguez family. As the courtroom cleared, I found myself face to face with my mother. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the reality she could no longer deny. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, years of unspoken hurt hanging in the air between us. "Anderson," she finally whispered, "I do not know what to say." I did not have the words either, not yet. I simply nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with the consequences of choices made over many years. Choices that had finally caught up to our family in ways none of us could have imagined. 1 year has passed since the trial ended. My life has changed in ways both painful and healing. I have established clear boundaries with my family, engaging only on my terms and refusing to be drawn back into unhealthy dynamics. I visit Jake in prison once a month. Our conversations were strained at first, with him alternating between blaming me and trying to manipulate my sympathy. Gradually, though, something has shifted. 3 months ago, during a visit, he looked at me with clear eyes and said simply, "I am sorry, Anderson, for everything, not just the car, for all of it." I do not know if I fully trust this change in him yet, but I choose to believe prison has given him something he never got at home, a chance to face consequences and grow from them. The rehabilitation program he is participating in seems to be helping him understand his alcohol dependency and take responsibility for his choices in a way our parents never required. My father, serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, refuses to see me. According to my mother, he still blames me for not protecting Jake, for breaking family loyalty. I have made peace with the fact that he may never change, never see the damage his favoritism has done, not only to me but to the son he thought he was helping. My relationship with my mother has evolved in unexpected ways. After months of silence following the trial, she reached out to me through a letter, acknowledging for the first time that she and my father had failed both of their sons in different ways. We now meet for coffee every few weeks, cautiously rebuilding a relationship that, while never perfect, might eventually become honest. I have remained in contact with the Rodriguez family, contributing to a college fund for their children and occasionally joining them for community events, raising awareness about drunk driving. Daniel Rodriguez remarkably has found it in his heart to forgive Jake, though he firmly believes the prison sentence is necessary and just. His capacity for compassion without enabling has taught me a great deal about what true love looks like. Sarah, the friend who provided my alibi, has become something more than a friend over this past year. Her unwavering support during the darkest moments showed me what genuine care looks like, and our relationship has grown into something I never thought possible for someone. From my background, someone who never really learned how healthy love should feel. The most profound change, though, has been internal. I no longer measure my worth through my parents' eyes. I no longer apologize for taking up space or for expecting fair treatment. I have learned that standing up for truth, even when it hurts, is not betrayal but integrity. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. Sometimes family loyalty means refusing to participate in lies that ultimately hurt everyone involved. Sometimes the hardest choice, the choice that feels like betrayal in the moment, is actually the most loving thing you can do for someone who has lost their way. If you are facing a similar impossible choice between truth and family, between justice and loyalty, know that you are not alone. The right path is rarely the easy one, but it is the one that lets you sleep at night, the one that builds a foundation for genuine healing rather than temporary comfort. What difficult choice are you facing today? Have you ever had to stand up against family pressure to do what you knew was right? Share your experiences in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories. Remember, true strength is not found in avoiding consequences, but in facing them with courage and integrity. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to write your own, even when the page seems too heavy to turn.